Hello, my name is Kevin Weiber. I'm here to give you some information on using the workload calculator at Lethbridge College. The version that we'll be using today is the appropriate one for April 2021. So let's begin by talking about a few of the items that you would need to gather before you begin. The first, of course, is your instructional assignment. That would include your class code identifiers. So an example from my workload would be AST 1142. We would identify sections. So a theory section would be a CO1, a lab section might be an LO1, and if you had a second section, it would be an LO2, example like that. We want to identify the term that you're in. So generally, we're going to be talking about 21 fall, 22 winter, moving into next year. We want to know what your student contact hours are. And the student contact hours assigned to any course are the total of the instructional, the lab, and the tutorial that are listed in the current course calendar. And of course, we want an idea of what your enrollment would be in that class. We also want to consider what we refer to as extraordinary workload considerations. So those might be, for example, chair release. There might be some new course development that's approved by your dean, any kind of non-instructional workload. If you have research assignments, that's a consideration that you'll want to clarify before we sit down to go through the workload calculator. And that would be a discussion with either your dean or whoever's supervising your research project and how much time you were assigned for that. We want to be sure that we're using the correct workload calculator. And the correct one is identified as Workload Calculator 2021 academic year. And what's unique about it to help you make sure that you're working with the right one is it has a salmon colored banner across the top. So if I share my screen with you for a moment. Oops, forgot to share. There we go. So if I share my screen with you, this is what that workload calculator should look like. The salmon colored banner across the top, the identification on it will be Workload Calculator 2021 academic year, and then we can start from there. The next step and the item that you would need to identify to begin with is what is your workload category? So if you're full-time, are you teaching an academic subject through a standard 15-week semester? This would involve a standard delivery pattern, meaning that you would be doing roughly the same number of student contact hours per week through the course of your terms. By comparison, what we're calling the compressed schedule or the academic instruction in 16 weeks is one where material will be blocked. You might do field work or something like that, and then come in and compress your schedule down in order to get all the theory time in. So there's academic subject instruction with 15 weeks or 540 hours of instruction. There's academic subject instruction with 16 weeks in a compressed schedule, which would be 576 hours of instruction. The other alternatives would be trades instruction for 649 hours or nursing clinical for 700 hours. The other options that are in the drop-down menu, and I can drop it down here so that you can see it, under full-time continuing, there's a drop-down menu. There's also part-time continuing, and there is casual or term certain. And what's going to be different in those is that you're going to have to be able to identify a percentage of workload that you're assigned. So you can be an 80% term certain. That means that we're going to plug that number in here, and a lot of our calculations then are going to aim at that as a target, as opposed to using the same target that we would use in a full-time instructor. Okay, so to begin looking at the workload calculator, once you've gathered all that information, we're going to start at the top. We're going to work our way down through the calculator. There's a place to enter your name on the title bar. So we can go right in here and we can put your name in there. Okay, that will identify that the work that we've done is associated with you as an instructor. Any place that we see blue, is a place that we need to provide an entry. And there are a couple other places in the calculator where we can provide entries, but the blue stuff is required in order for us to come up with an appropriate workload. So we're going to start with identifying whether you're full-time or part-time. So full-time continuing will then have the option under this drop-down menu to look at academic subject 15 weeks, academic subjects 16 weeks, trades, or nursing. Okay, so we're going to select the 15 weeks, which is kind of the standard pattern. And you'll notice down here that that will generate 540 target hours. And the 540 target hours represents your student contact time. Now, we recognized when we built the calculator that if you have an hour of student contact time, generally you'll have time ahead of that getting prepared. You'll have time in assessment after. And the expectation is that you'll do some maintenance on your course, and you'll ensure that your course is improving and being kept up. So what happens then is that we allow 1 hour of those for that amount of time for every hour that you're with the students. So that 540 hours is doubled to 1,080 hours. And that 1,080 hours comes off of 1,330. 1,330 represents the 190 assignable days, 7 hours a day. Okay. The difference between the 1,330 and your instructional load, this 250 hours, is expected to be spent in professional development or institutional service. So professional development is maintaining your instructional ability and instructional skills and improving those skills. The institutional discipline and service are the meetings that we attend, the recruiting that we do for our program, the open houses, those kind of things that we do in support of the college. Now, when we look at the academic instruction as 15 weeks, we're assuming that that's a full-time workload. So you can see that right here it shows as 100%. But if we were not working at 100%, we can actually go in there and alter that. So let's put 50% in. And when we do that, you'll see that rather than showing as the 540 and doubling that up, we're shooting at 50% of that. So instead of the 1,330, we're doing 665, and the 540 we would normally be doing, what is it, 290? No, that's not right, 270. And when we double a 270, we come out to 540. It only leaves 125, so these numbers are reduced. So it filters all the way through the workload calculator to provide you with the right picture of what you should be doing. We'll move that back to 100%. So select whatever your value should be and what you've agreed on for your percentage of workload. The next step after that is to go down to the blue section in professional development, institutional service, and applied research. Now, if there is no specific assignment in professional development or project that you're working on, if there's no specific institutional discipline service that you're working on, and you aren't working in applied research, you don't need to touch any of these. So there is an automatic fill. So you'll notice that filled at 70% or 70 hours in professional development and 179 hours in institutional discipline service. Those areas are an expectation that as an instructor, you will contribute those kind of times to your professional development and to the institution. And we don't expect you to track every one of those. If you did come up with a project that you were going to do, so I'm going to put project 1 in here, where I've sat down and discussed this with my dean or my supervisor, and I've decided that I'm going to do that, and it's going to take me 100 hours. If I put the 100 hours in here, it takes the 70 out and gives me the 100 hours. It's assuming that if I'm spending that time, I'm not going to spend the average amount or the regular amount. Okay, so we can also alter those things that way. Keep in mind that if I do put a project in there, it does eliminate the original. It doesn't get added on to the original. If you have an applied research project that you've agreed to, you can sit down with whoever's supervising the applied research project, perhaps your own dean, and make sure that you understand what kind of time they are allowing you for that and enter that in here. So a very brief description of the applied research and then an hour value. Be aware that if you're talking about a credit value, that a credit value is an instructional term. And when we talk about a 3-credit course in a standard 15-week semester, that would be 45 hours of instruction. It would also include 45 hours of prep, maintenance, and delivery. And so when you look at a 3-credit release, it should be entered in here as a 90 credit or a 90-hour credit. Okay. The bulk of the work that you'll do, completing the workload calculator, falls under your instructional responsibilities. Generally, that's the biggest part of an instructor's workload. And so that's the part that we'll focus on a little bit. When we look at entering the material in the instructional responsibility, we start on the left here with a course code number or a course number. There is a drop-down menu here that includes a fair number of the courses that are offered through the college. But of course, we're always changing course codes. We're always moving courses around. We're adding new courses. And because of that, your course may not appear in that drop-down menu. Now, assuming it does appear, so here you'll see ACC 1146. I can enter that. I need to put in a section number. So this is CO1 because it's a theory class. And I'll enter a term, in this case 21 FL, so 21 in the fall is the term that I'm working in. And when I do that, I'll just take this one out I'll add another one here. That's what I'll do. ACC 1146. Okay, what it does is it populates a portion of that row. So you'll notice that it didn't populate the weekly student contact hours. It didn't populate the prep and delivery hours until we see how many hours a week it has. Okay, it does populate an average course fill. And it's important to understand that the average course fill represents a 3-year average, and it's there so that we can develop workload before we know what the actual enrollment is. Okay, we have the ability to change that when we know what the actual enrollment is, but in terms of workloading or preparation for workloading, it'll try and preload or give you an estimate of what it expects to see. Okay, so this one, because it's the second course, would be CO2. Okay, and you'll notice that it doesn't change the differential prep flag. The assumption is that if you're preparing for that course for the first offering, the second offering would be prepared very similar and that you wouldn't be doing something unique there. Anytime that you have 2 sections, whether it's 2 lab sections, or in this case, 2 theory sections, load them one under the other so that it doesn't, or so that it loads the differential prep appropriately. Now, if the first one was a 3 weekly student contact hours, I assume the second one would be. But if I went in here and I said this one's going to be offered 12 hours, 14 hours. Okay, this warning pops up. It says you've entered a number that's not anticipated. So please click no to choose that I've made a mistake, or yes to say, yep, that's what I had in mind. That's what I want to enter. And it will let you move on from there. Okay, so I'm going to say no, that's not what I meant. And I'm going to put my original 3 in there, and then it will preload that. Now, we'll add the average course fill in here. And the average course fill works on these classroom averages. So it works between 20 students and 30 students to give you a normal class. So if I put this at 28 students, okay, it will give me the 3 credits. So 45 hours worth of instruction time, plus 45 hours worth of prep, maintenance, and evaluation. And it will load 90 hours over here for my course load. Okay, if my class is a little bit larger, you can see that this one is 32. There's a little bit of an adjustment here. So you get 4.4 hours extra, and it's loading 94.4 over here. If it was lower than the minimum, which is 20, it would give you a little less than 90. So it's trying very hard to accommodate larger class sizes and give you some kind of credit for those larger class sizes. So now we can go over here and load a different course. Okay, and call that a CO1 section. Okay, and say that that is 3 hours a week. We got 24 students in that class. It loads as a standard class. Okay. If I can't find my courses in the drop-down menu, I can go down here and I can say, okay, I'm going to do AST 1142. Okay, and it will automatically load everything except it doesn't know the average course fill because it doesn't recognize the course. So this is going to be a CO1 course. It's going to be in 21 fall. Okay, and this one's going to have the same 3 hours a week. Okay, and this one is going to have 15 students. Now you'll notice that we're still within the range. Okay, and we've loaded our regular 90 hours. Okay, that's a mistake. Okay, the next thing I want to do here is I want to go AST 1142 and put an L at the end for lab. Okay, this will be my LO1 section. That'll be in 21 fall. Okay, and this is going to be 3 hours a week. Okay, now it preloaded here that I had 10 students. I know that I have to have 15 because I had 15 in the other. Okay, so this is going to load as a lab, and you'll notice that this number here will be slightly different. So we can have 20 students in the theory class, but we only want to have the smaller group in the lab class. So that will preload for you. Okay, now I've got 15 hours of instructional time. The sort of standard rule of thumb, if you had no other influences, is 18. So I'm going to put one more 3-hour class in here. Made up 3-hour class. That is having 15 students. Oops, sorry, 20 students. Now that should be a complete workload in that first semester. So we've got 18 hours of instruction, and that'll tell you that down at the bottom here for this term only. It'll tell you that I'm looking at 540 delivery hours, okay, and 270 delivery hours and 270 prep, maintenance, and evaluation hours. So I've been assigned those times, but I've made a little bit of an adjustment here for class size. So my workload will reflect 544.4 hours. We're done that term. Now we can scroll down here and do a second term. And I just preloaded that in the interest of time. I gave a few examples here of places where we've made an adjustment. So you'll notice a 1.4 here because, where are we there? I'm going to jump down to this one. You'll notice that this one across here is a small class. And for that reason, you get a little less credit for your workload. Okay, and this one below it is a large class. You get a little extra credit against your workload. So now if I go down and look at the bottom of this, I've still got the 18 hours a week, the 540 assignable hours. There's been an adjustment both up and down in this semester, and we ended up at 547.4 hours. So now our total instructional load at this point is 1,091.8 hours out of that 1,330 that we're aiming at. If I look at the instructional extra responsibilities with extra assignments, if you don't have any casual contracts, you don't need to worry about filling out this section. If you did have casual contracts, fill it out the same way. And when you fill it out the same way, it will generate the number value of your extra assignments. Now, if we keep scrolling down, there's an extraordinary workload considerations and requirements section here. And this is where we would load anything that's a non-instructional workload. So for example, if you had a chair release, that would go in here. If you had a workload consideration for service on the faculty association, that would go in here. Anything that's non-instructional, you can enter in here. Just make sure you discuss that with your supervisor and that everybody's on the same page about what you're entering. If it's a credit release, remember to double the credit value so that you get an hourly entry here. Now, once that's been entered, then we can scroll down to the workload summary at the bottom here. And the workload summary at the bottom is going to compare everything back to that 1330 or the 190 days at 7 hours a day. In this case, the way that we've loaded it, we ended up with 1,342. So we ended with 100.9% of a workload. Now, given how we're going to make these little adjustments based on class size and a few other considerations, hitting 100% is certainly our goal, but it's very difficult to do. And so we've allowed a 10% variation, and that's what's represented in the little chart above it. If you were at 105 or 107 or at 93, that warrants a discussion with your supervisor that assigns your workload. Sit down and say, is this fair? Is this reasonable? Is there any other considerations, or can we make some changes to bring it back closer to 100? But keep in mind that the 10% variation is acceptable. Okay, we can work within that range, or we've agreed to work within that range. This then can generate conversations with your supervisor based on the amount of your workload. We can look at extraordinary workload considerations that have been assigned to you. We can look at the number of differential preps. Okay, we talk about differential preps. 4 or 5 differential preps per semester is pretty much normal. That's what everybody in the college are doing right now, or not everybody, but generally doing. If you start to get where your differential preps get a little higher, start talking about, can we do something about that, or is there some consideration for that? And then we can go all the way back up to the top and say, I'm not going to be able to do as much professional development this year. So if I'm loaded a little heavily, maybe next year you can load me a little lighter and I can catch up on something like that. So those are the kind of conversations that we could have. Now, we have members in the faculty association, including Keith, myself. Ryan's worked with this quite a bit, and Dave will be the representative on the PSC committee who will be working with this workload calculator a fair amount. So if you have any questions, don't be afraid to reach out and ask, and we'll certainly do what we can. We'll even sit down with you and run your workload through it to make sure that that you're loading it right. Thank you.